Welcome to my talk. My name is Thomas Spiegel, and I work at the University of Potsdam. And today I'm talking to you about parasocial relationships and loneliness from a phenomenological point of view. So there's a longer version of this talk as published as a paper in a recently released volume. I think it came out last month. Edited by Friedrich Niera on Loneliness and the Crisis of Work. So if you're interested, you can just have a look at the article, and I'm very happy to send you a preprint if you'd like. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about. So first I'm going to tell you what I'm arguing for. Then step 2 and 3 and 4 are more or less say conceptual clarifications or ramifications of what I want to say. And then 5 is sort of, I guess, the phenomenological part, and 6 is drawing conclusions. So what I want to argue today is that there's an a priori and not only merely empirical connection between what I call modern parasocial relations and loneliness. And this is important because there's a lot of empirical research on parasocial relationships and on loneliness, and there's sometimes posited that either parasocial relationships are helping alleviate loneliness, or they say that they exacerbate loneliness. But I think it can be shown in a philosophical way that there's more than an empirical connection between these phenomena. And I think that this connection is not that parasocial relationships, as many say, alleviate loneliness, but they make it worse. Also, again, for non-empirical reasons. So, sociologists have been warning us for a long time now, I think, that we spend less and less time together, and this is not good for us. So one example from the USA is that citizens spend almost 3 hours watching TV, but only 40 minutes socializing every day. And this number has supposedly gone down over the last few decades, over the last century, the time of us socializing together. And I think that you will find comparable statistics in virtually all Western countries, probably also in a lot of non-Western countries. And there are technological determinists who say that this issue can be solved by just doing more technology or advancing technology further. And in this context, I think the key idea is Marshall McLuhan's, that there's something who promised us the creation of what he calls the global village, the idea that mankind comes together through better communicative devices. And McLuhan is not the only one. There are important people like Mark Zuckerberg here, who claims that Facebook and probably also other social media help bring the world together in some important sense, sort of against kind of putative atomization. He says, I started Facebook to connect my college. I always thought one day someone would connect the whole world, but never thought it would be us. Would have settled for connecting my whole dorm. We were just college kids, but we cared so much about this idea. A lot of people want to connect. It's not enough to simply connect the world. We must also work to bring the world closer together. And he probably doesn't truly believe this. His main motivation is money, probably. But if we take him by his word, and we probably should, this is what it means. And then I found this nice quote by a small Twitch streamer, an article about a small Twitch streamer. The reason I started streaming was that I was kind of looking for human connections. Guy who played video games publicly to usually 0 viewers for a long time. He says, I stream to escape loneliness and depression. While he has mostly been streaming without an audience, every so often an errant person will drop by and stick around. So even some streamers, people who are on Twitch and stream themselves playing video games, do this in order to feel less lonely. And this is already an example of what parasocial relationships are. So the idea goes back to sociologists Horton and Wohl from the 50s, and they said, one of the most striking characteristics of the new mass media, radio, television, and the movies, is that they give the illusion of face-to-face relationships with the performer. We propose to call the seeming face-to-face relationship between spectator and performer a parasocial relationship. And one of the so this concept has become extremely important in social science and in media studies. But it is virtually ignored in philosophy and even in social ontology, unfortunately. And it's not that clear what these parasocial relations are. They're technically as old as humankind, it has been observed. So you could say the relationship between a deity and a believer is parasocial. You could even say that the relationship between a person and their ancestors who are venerated by the person is also parasocial. And they're immensely important now, more than they've ever been. So if you go by, if you think money is an indicator of societal importance, they've become very important. So Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok are, I think, the three largest, or three of the most salient firms who operate on parasocial relations, and yeah, they make a lot of money. And I think that I don't give a full account of what I think parasocial relationships are here. That's kind of a current project I'm doing. So for the moment, I think it's important to point out that what Horton and Wohl call face-to-face is misleading. So for example, pen pals don't have a face-to-face relationship with one another if they've never met, but it would be weird to say that they have a parasocial relationship. I think what's more important, or what is more defining, is that these relations are asymmetric in a specific sense. And I don't think that's a very good criterion, but it's the best I've come up with so far. I think all the other criteria are bad, or worse at least. So I think that there's a distinction between a persona and an audience, and what distinguishes them is the means of access to one another. And I think that this mode has been, so you could say that the history of parasocial relationships is one that tries to pretend to bridge this gap more and more. So what I call modern parasocial relationships, like ones you have on Instagram, on YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, are seemingly reciprocal. And seemingly hierarchies are flattened there because you seemingly can engage with the people you venerate there or do you watch there. And again, this is not a perfect definition. It's more or less like a heuristic. And I think for now, I want to say you have to take a piecemeal approach. I think there are potentially open-ended possibilities of media or ways of interaction of being parasocial. And now to an even perhaps more difficult concept, loneliness. So what is loneliness anyway? There's a number of different philosophical and psychological frameworks of loneliness. And I can't go into any and all of them here, and I think it's counterproductive. So I presented this talk already last week on a conference specifically dedicated to loneliness. And at the moment, there's a big divide between people in philosophy and people in psychology on this. And there's also a big divide. While the psychologists are fairly unified in their approach, this metaphysical and phenomenological approaches. And I'm not going to argue for either here. I'm just saying for what I want to get here, more phenomenological approaches are better. But I think there's good reason to assume that they are more apt. And for the sake of this talk, I'm just saying that loneliness is the deprivation of someone, but it's not a specific someone, but it's a generalized someone. And this is sometimes been called the other in 20th century philosophy. I hate this term. I prefer to speak of the generalized second person. And I think it's wrong to say that loneliness is merely a feeling, as suggested by many people in psychology, but also in philosophy. And I think that this gets loneliness wrong for reasons I'm not getting into here. But I think ultimately loneliness is a subject transcendent existential state. So you can have an experience of loneliness, but the phenomenon of loneliness is something over and above your experience of loneliness. I think it's helpful to think of this in Heideggerian terms. So Heidegger suggested that the fundamental existential state is being with others, so Mitsein. You never find yourself alone in a way that is not contingent. And I think that in loneliness, the experience of being with others is partially suspended. So loneliness is a kind of experience of being without others in a very fundamental sense. And hence it has to be one of the most fundamental experiences of human life, since being with others is so fundamental itself. It seems to me that both being with others and the feeling of being without others is baked into the human condition. And in order to get at what I wish to say here, I need to rely on the work of Martin Buber, someone who's a minor figure, unfortunately, although I think he has very interesting things to say. He's a religious and arguably phenomenological thinker of the 20th century. He's not an official phenomenologist, but I think his thought is phenomenological. And he certainly is a difficult author and inimical to current philosophic sensibilities, especially to people who prefer metaphysical approaches. And his main idea, or I guess his main contribution to philosophy, was his distinction between what he called the I-it or the I-you mode. And he said that human life is always in the I-it or the I-you mode. It's easier to start with the I-it because it seems so much more familiar to us. So the I-it is the engagement with the thing world. It's all the contexts in which we treat things as means to an end. And we can treat inanimate objects and even persons as mere its. And it's seemingly reciprocal. Like I'm treating things as its all the time, even other persons, but I'm also being treated as an it all the time. So a prostitute and her suitor can treat each other as an it, and I can treat my colleague's dog as a source of fun or entertainment, and the dog can just also treat me as a source of pets and food, basically. And the I-you mode is more difficult. It keeps eluding me what Buber actually meant by it, but I'm going to do my best to tell you what I think it is. And he thinks there's a way of engaging with the world where we are in contact with our surroundings or parts of our surroundings in a way that these surroundings are not objects in a strong sense. And that's something he thinks is possible it's an attitude I can have towards sentient and non-sentient beings. He calls the you world the world of true relationships or Beziehungen. And these relationships are unmediated and direct. I cannot have an I-you relation to someone over, let's say, mediated by another person, by someone, by the testimony of another person. And the most important aspect is that these relationships are without purpose. So here, one of his nice quotes: "The basic word I thou can be spoken only with one's whole being. The concentration and fusion into a whole being can never be accomplished by me. I require a thou to becoming I say thou." It's important that this is not dependent on my will alone or on me alone, whether something like this obtains. It says, if will and grace are joined together, that means, and grace doesn't say it out loud, but he's probably referring to the grace of God. And it's always a gamble in this sense, because I can engage with the world in a way, but the world might not answer in the same way. And well, he thinks that there are other cases in which I can have a relationship with you. For our purposes here, the second person, the second human person I will take as a standard case. And this is important for what I want to say. He said that all genuine life, the kind of life that makes human life human, ultimately, is always the one that happens in the IU mode. To be sure, some men who in the world of things make do with experience and using have constructed for themselves an idea, annex, or superstructure in which they find refuge and reassurance in the face of intimations of nothingness. But the id-humanity that some imagine, postulate, and advertise has nothing in common with the bodily humanity to which a human being can truly say you. And here he refers to academic intellectuals, us, as prime examples of people who are in the I-ed world. So, and what does this have to do with loneliness now? So, to summarize, loneliness is the absence of the second person, and the second person is that which appears in genuine IU relationships, but parasocial relationships are asymmetric relationships between at least two people. And so, what I want to say is that counterintuitively, parasocial relationships do not really feature the second person, at least in the full sense. And if we analyze parasocial relationships, at least modern ones, I think that the main point is, or the main reason for that is not only the mediation through TV or radio or something else or your computer, but that these relationships are in actuality never truly without purpose. The main purposes are, in these modern parasocial relationships, monetary gain and ego boosting and attention and a lot of other stuff. And perhaps even on the side of the consumers, so to speak, a desire to curb one's loneliness. If I engage with parasocial persona in this manner, there's an argument to be made that I cannot engage that person in the IU mode as Buber would have wanted. So I think that parasocial relationships simulate and pretend to be genuine social relationships. And I think ultimately people who use this feel this in their bones and feel that this is not truly what it means to be social. And what appears in the reason is, I think, what appears in parasocial relationships is not a you in a ambitious sense. I think neither party is to blame for this. It's not like I'm doing cultural criticism here. I'm just trying to analyze what's going on. So an audience may seek to alleviate loneliness and fill an empty house with someone's voice. I think that's fair enough. And the persona rightfully seeks to make a living, trying to monetize their streaming persona, and maybe they even like to entertain people. So it's not necessarily a relationship of exploitation. So, and it seems obvious to me that modern parasocial relationships, which are highly technological cannot fulfill McLuhan's promise of a global village. And I think more than a global village, what parasocial relationships give us is something like a global crypt, so to speak, where we go to engage with people who are not really there, like people who may go into a crypt to speak with the spirits of the dead. And parasocial relationships sometimes pretend to contribute to solving loneliness, like Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook does, yet arguably exacerbate loneliness by giving a false impression of connection to someone who isn't the second person. And again, what does this mean? Am I saying we should return to a better and simpler time, back to the, I guess, 1940s, 30s, even earlier? I think it's naive and also not a smart philosophical take, because on one hand, there's no returning to simpler, better times. There's nothing we can do about it, and technological progress cannot be halted. And there's also a reason why these technologies came about, or why these parasocial relationships gain more and more traction. And these are connected to social ramifications and developments, which themselves are very complex and cannot simply be turned back on. So, like, social atomization as a progress is related to the development of capitalism, for example, the ending of subsistence economies, and many other factors which I cannot think about, or which sociologists know better about. And I mean, there's this nice quote that's often quoted, and when it comes to loneliness, by Hannah Arendt: what prepares men for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, once a borderline experience, usually suffered in certain marginal social conditions like old age, has become an everyday experience of the ever-growing masses of our century. And I think if there's, it's difficult to prove or anything, but if there is anything to her famous claim, and of parasocial relationships inherently linked to loneliness, then parasocial relationships certainly deserve much more critical attention than they currently receive. And with this, I thank you for your attention.